Join us for a business and kingdom leaders conversation on disruptive leadership, responding to Africa's unique challenges and opportunities. The panelists are Dr. Jendayi Frazer, Dr. Oby Ezekwesili, the Honorable Dr. Ekwow Spio-Garbrah, and Yonny Kulendi, moderated by Bright Simons.
I will start by trying to give a very brief overview of the topic. I guess I'm supposed to do that as the moderator. And I was trying to look into the etymology of the word disruption, because this panel is about disruptive leadership. And I just realized that, in fact, the two root words are Greek. So this is actually the name of the ruler of the underworld in Greek mythology. So not a very positive image. The underworld is often associated with death, but maybe there's a reason why. And rapture, obviously there is rapture in the old sense of tearing something apart, but it also rhymes with something that in Christian eschatology is of extreme significance: the rapture towards the end of time. So I guess all the elements, all the ingredients are set for a discussion around what we mean by disruptive leadership. What kind of leadership leads to the kind of changes that can transform a society radically? That's the direction that I'd like to take this conversation. Is there some type of leadership, particularly examples of African leadership, that can change our continent in a completely transformative manner? So I'll start off with Doc. You have seen more transitions in your career than some people, or rather some groups of people have seen a century. You've moved from being international public service at Transparency International, through the World Bank, served in government, and then you became the face of Bring Back Our Girls. When you look at the way that leadership is evolving on the continent, is there grounds for optimism that this kind of disruptive, changing, or transformative leadership could become a possibility in your lifetime? Or is it already happening already?
Thank you very much. What a joy to be on this panel with all of these wonderful brothers and my sister, Jendayi. Thanks again to Action Chapel for the opportunity of being part of this conversation. You know, the truth is, failure of this continent is no longer sustainable. It just isn't. We can't sustain this failure anymore. So a steady state of failure cannot work. So whether we like it or not, there's got to be disruption. The issue is, what kind of disruption would we have? The chaotic disruption is the one that takes you to being a Humpty Dumpty that cannot be put together again. So you look at the situation in DRC and you see how they are struggling to put Humpty Dumpty together again. Or you could have a situation where failure is no longer sustainable and there's got to be disruption, and that disruption throws up the situation you have in Rwanda. So instead of a Humpty Dumpty, you actually have a sense that a country can, 30 years after genocide, be leading many countries that did not go through any such stress in health and education indicators, which determine the productivity of countries, and therefore which form the basis of economic growth and rapid possibility of economic development. So it's a matter of which type of disruption, not whether disruption will happen. And the reason is simple. Annually, this continent releases some 12 to 13 million young people into the labor market. Only 10% of them get absorbed because the continent is not economically transforming and expanding opportunities as it should. The gap between where we should be and where we are is that disruptive leadership. Who would start it? Is the question.
Interesting. So, yeah. So, if I understand you correctly, you see a spectrum of which, on the one end, we can see a country like DRC, which is struggling with this whole state formation process, becoming a proper country. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you see Rwanda, where we have a kind of leadership that is slowly beginning to reintegrate the country back. But do you have some indicators when you go to an African country? Do you have some signs that give you an idea of which end of the spectrum that country is tending towards?
There is this publication by is it a Peace Fund? I forget which body publishes the fragility of state. So it looks at the state of each country in the world and measures economic, social, human development indicators, political stability issues, and then it does the ranking. Mm-hmm. And for goodness sake, most of our countries on the continent find themselves making the top lists of such countries. Yeah. That shows that we have a serious leadership challenge. Often, people talk about we don't have institutions. And when they talk about institutions, they assume that when you set up an agency under the law, that's an institution. No, it's a mere agency. Institution building is an evolutionary process and a significant thing that enables you build agency to institution is called leadership. We have a leadership crisis on our continent. We have a leadership vacuum on our continent. And until that is filled, it's going to be difficult for us to get to the level of growth that we must get in order for economic prosperity to be the lot of our population. I suppose that this kind of a platform, that's part of why I was moved and I declared what I declared when I was giving my talk. This kind of a platform is absolutely necessary because, by the way, it is not technical leadership that we're lacking on the continent. We're lacking what is called adaptive leadership. Leadership that solves problems because they are value problems. That energy does not work in a place like Nigeria. It's not because we can't get the number of engineers you need to fix it technically. It doesn't happen because there is a governance problem. Health sector is in crisis because there is a governance problem. If you take issues of poverty, it's not the technical solutions that are lacking. It's a governance problem. And that governance problem, the simple definition of it, is not just about the systems and the structures and the processes. It is that you have a serious leadership vacuum. And that leadership vacuum, the equation that goes for it is simply the loss of value-based leadership. And the system that can regrow it is right here.
Interesting.
We're gathered here.
Interesting. You have a thing for education. I remember in my youth, one of the things that you did was to set up or to help set up the Get Fund to put more resources into education. But of late, I think you agree with me that it's not a simple case of just expanding the resource base of education. It's moved beyond that, which is why I think you moved into the foundation. Now, when I think about this carefully and considering what Oby said around the whole challenge of absorbing young people into the workforce, what are your indicators of effectiveness, state effectiveness, using that yardstick of absorbing young people into the society and making them more productive?
Thank you very much, Bright, for that question. And let me also add my voice to those who have congratulated His Eminence, the Archbishop, Lady Rosa, and all those who helped to organize this very informative event. And of course, I also express my appreciation to my panelists, co-panelists. I'll answer your question in a minute, but I think setting the discussion of disruptive leadership in the right context, which leads to the question you've asked, I take my lead from the very first part of Genesis, when God's Spirit was brooding upon the earth, and it was very dark, and he said, "Let there be light." Now, that very act of God was the most disruptive thing that probably has occurred on earth. Here we are talking about Ghana, Nigeria, most African countries not having enough light, not having enough energy, and therefore not able to industrialize and to make the most of our economic opportunities. But let there be light when it comes to leadership. Part of the challenge for many of our countries is that most of the leaders in our countries, in emerging economies, and in some other industrialized countries, don't want too much light in their countries. And I'm not talking about physical light, I'm talking about illumination. They don't want people to know what is going on. So if you can do things in dark, you can involve yourself in all kinds of corrupt behavior that cannot be seen, then you're already having a good time. So the let there be light, which was in the first book of the Bible, and which also is a problem in terms of electricity and power, needs to be translated into the light of knowledge, which Dr. Ezekwesili spoke about earlier, and also the importance of having information and all the other things. Now, that leads us to knowledge, information, and education. And the challenge for most of our continent now is the fact that we have a growing youth bulge. If you look at the demographics of Africa, the next 20, 30 years, most African countries are going to have more than 50% of their populations below 25. Many of them increasingly because of the liberalization of the educational system. You now have a lot of private educational institutions, including Dominion University right here, and some 80 other private institutions in Ghana. Nigeria is going through the same thing, many private institutions. So more young people are getting a piece of paper which they believe entitles them to a certain quality of life. But the economies are not growing quickly enough to allow them to enjoy what they think they're entitled to. Now, if you add that rapid growth of the population, general population in Africa, which is higher than almost any region in the world, to the rapid growth of the unemployed, graduate, and educated young person, to a system where social networking through the internet, mobile phones, allows people to organize themselves much better than before. And even though we may say our health systems may not be the best, most Africans are now much healthier than we've been in many centuries. You don't see the dry collarbones we used to call somebody's chain in Ghana, or in the Eastern African, Northeastern African area where Eritrea, Ethiopia, and others used to have these children that were all starving. Those people now look fairly healthy. So healthy young people, educated young people, organized and socially networked young people, and unemployed young people. What do you think the impact of that will be? And that is why people like us have been encouraged to create such bodies like the Africa Business Center for Developing Education, ABCDE, as a means of all of us getting back into the classroom. We are looking at a massive get back into the classroom movement, both especially at secondary and tertiary level, to download all the knowledge that we may have acquired and which many of our classmates are taking to Osu and Awudome Cemetery, at least for those of us who live in Ghana. And many others are going to other cemeteries in Nigeria, United States, and so forth, without giving back knowledge to the next generation. Now, if we can do that, then the next generation will be a little bit more prepared for the entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial zeal, some of which is in the Bible in terms of what, God blessed Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. They didn't work as public servants. They didn't look for government appointments. They were rearing sheep and doing farming and fishing, etc. Jesus came, didn't look for public servants. He selected fishermen, carpenters, and others to work with him. That was disruptive leadership. If you look at the way in which, David himself was selected after Saul had been king, people thought that the family that was going to, the person in the family was going to be another tall, big guy. So the brothers of David came forward, expecting to be selected. But, we've had a lady here with 50 brothers and sisters, and Papa himself tells us how he grew up with over 40 brothers and sisters. If God were to come here to select a leader from those families, you would think that the race belonged to the swift and the battle to the strong. And yet the shepherd in the bush, who nobody wanted to come forward, was the one that came forward. So we've had disruptive leadership already in Africa. Kwame Nkrumah was a disruptive leader who came from colonial master and said, no, we need independence now, not in the shortest possible time, and help them, we all helped him to drive away the colonialists, and then he said, let's network Africa's independence as well. We've had other leaders that have come and have disrupted even civilian governments. In the case of President Rawlings, President Akufo-Addo said today, he was complimented for his style of disruptive leadership, which was one of patience and waiting for his turn after losing a number of elections. So the disruptive leadership is already here, but what about those leaders who have been in office for 40, 50 years on this continent of Africa? There are countries where two father and son, have governed countries for 50 years between them. There are countries that have had only 2 presidents in 50 years. There are some who have 19 and are still presidents after 30 years in office. So if you want to disrupt leadership in Africa, we've got to go after people like this who don't believe in succession planning. We heard T.J. Jakes talk about the best kind of leader is the one who prepares a successor. So if you're a leader and will not prepare successors, and nobody can succeed you, then you failed in leadership. So disruptive leadership is an important subject. And when we take it to among the students, then we hope that the next generation will take up the suggestions we are talking about here today and become a new breed of leaders, thinking about succession, thinking about the morality, thinking about the God's way and not our way, and making sure that Christian principles become what we put in leadership, not just in the church, but in business, in politics, in entertainment, and in sports, and other fields. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. If you were a Christian in Ghana, conventional Christian, you didn't have to dress very well. You had to be modest. I want to talk about change or transformative leadership, but at what I call a micro level. Big people see big things and talk about big things. So it's perfectly in context to talk about leadership at the top level. And quite clearly, there's a leadership deficit in terms of transformational or change leadership. But we don't want to become a Congo, and we don't want the experience of Rwanda, and we don't want to drift. So what do we do? Here's my suggestion. For each of us is a leader. And you are a leader first and foremost of yourself. You are a leader of a family, of a group, of a small business, of a company. So you've got to ask yourself, given where you are in life, do you like where you are? If your answer is no, it means you must change. If you are going to change, change will require as an imperative that you cannot continue to do things the old way. If you do things the old way, you will get the same results. Therefore, you need to disrupt that old way and adopt change, adopt new ways, adopt new approaches, adopt new methods, and adopt new processes. For each of us, if you look at your father, look at the business you are running, if you don't like the state of affairs in your home, don't repeat the things that your father did. Otherwise, you will end up with the same result. That's leadership. And that's disruptive leadership. Now, my classic example is the example that His Excellency referred to, but from a different emphasis. Our Lord and Savior was a disruptive leader. He brought about change. Everything he did was unconventional. And it is to produce better results by resorting to more creative means. David was a disruptive leader. What happened in the story of David? The Israelites were confronted with a Goliath. Goliath would desecrate, abuse, and demean the God of Israel. They were unhappy. They did not like it. Now, a young man shows up. He was not a soldier. He was a shepherd. And in that crisis, and Africa is in a crisis, Saul resorted to unconventional ways by bringing in a non-soldier boy. He wasn't even even a young man, to confront a giant Goliath. What did David do? David rejected the conventional armor because he did not want to do it the way they have always done it. So he used unconventional means. Now, but what drew David into this? Bible teaches us that David was offended and looked at this Goliath and said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he will desecrate my God? So you've got to look at yourself. Each of us has a Goliath in our circumstances. Africa has Goliaths. Ghana has Goliaths. Our Goliaths are poverty, corruption, unemployment, illiteracy, disease, lack of health care. These are the Goliaths that confront us. If we do not want to tolerate and endure these Goliaths, we have to change our approaches. And my proposition is that let each of us begin the change with ourselves. We change leadership. Our personal discipline, our approach to things, the way we conduct ourselves. If you are a young man, don't finish school. The conventional thing is that everyone finishes school and starts writing applications and looking for a job. But quite clearly, those jobs are not there. So you've got to think out of the box. And I say to people, I drove a taxi in Accra when I was in law school. And that's some of the ways by which I got myself through school. I traded, I sold jewelry, I sold clothes, I sold women's hairpiece whilst I was a student. And that's how I paid my way through school, because there was a Goliath in my life I rejected. It's called dependency. Now, and it's because Ghanaians have what I call a dependency syndrome. You have young adults, school leavers, you go to school, you finish school, you have a degree, you finish polytechnic, you are sitting at home, you're doing nothing. Go out and do something with yourself. Because to sit down and wait for the government job, that is not coming. The first thing you do is disrupt your own life. Reject the conventional approach and move in and do something different. Now, as we position ourselves, as we transform ourselves, where do the leaders come from? The leaders come from amongst us. So you're going to have already transformed individuals rising into national leadership. If you heard the Papa's Lamentations, it is about a system that is creeping in on us, where we end up with people, most of whom have not disrupted their own lives, being put together to disrupt our lives. It ain't happening, people. So we have to disrupt our own lives, rise to the occasion, reject the old ways, adopt change. Listen, we are sitting on the premises that God used a disruptive leader to bring about. Now, and without intending to placate the Papa. Now, I was a young man growing up. If you were a Christian in Ghana, conventional Christian, you didn't have to dress very well. You had to be modest. Papa was bastardized for elegance and insisting that the good things belong to the children of God. Today we all come here well dressed like this. We should give him an offering. It is the audacity to be disruptive, to resort to change, to resort to unconventional ways. Even churches were not supposed to be this luxurious. And all of that is the trick of the devil. And if we don't change our ways so we can change our personal circumstances, we just building a time bomb. Then tomorrow, we will have a Liberia, we could have a Congo, we could have a Rwanda before, we could have an implosion. So let us, each of us, begin to disrupt our own lives. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you. As passionate as always. As passionate as always. Yes, the Christ himself said, you cannot put old wine into new bags. But I wonder whether there are also succession or waves and successions of disruption. And the reason I ask, because you took us to the gospel, and in the gospel, John the Baptist was a very disruptive leader. They said he was a lone man in the wilderness. And yet still, you do recall that at one point, people went to the disciples of Christ and said, why is it that the disciples of John fast, but your disciples do not fast? And he said, why do you fast when the bridegroom is still with us? Now, using that as a context around this whole mindset change, because that's what you are pushing. You're saying we should do internal transformation, mindset change. But the truth is that sometimes it's the times, the age, not our personal discernment, but the age itself that forces change upon us. As leaders of value, leaders who have values, whether it's the Christian values, which the majority of people here have, or some other source of values, but leaders who have values, how do you position yourself so that change is not forced upon you? How do you recognize change? If you're a leader, if you are a young student figuring out what academic path to pursue, if you run a business and things are changing around you. In our own countries, we see change, tremendous change. How does one spot change? In Christianity, they often say the spirit of discernment. But how, in practical terms, does one build oneself for spotting this kind of change? In addition to the internal transformation. Yonny.
No, I mean, first of all, in order to build yourself for change, one, you need self-discipline. You need character. You need to acquire knowledge, as she said. You need skills. You need to be at a place where you reject where you are. You have to get there. If you are comfortable with where you are, then you are not going to desire change. You've got to come to a place of revulsion. And like that prodigal son, say to yourself, I will arise. The prodigal son rejected his circumstances at the point where he found himself. And like all of us, Bible says, David reached within himself and drew power. My sense of life is that there's a lot, and I think I heard someone say this, I don't want to plagiarize it. There are a lot of things that God has already taken care of on his side. But we keep pestering God, and God has no time for that. You wake up in the morning, you're an able-bodied African young man or woman. You have some minimum skills. You have some amount of education. You have, at least you have an able body. The sun should not set on you without you doing anything productive to change your own life.
Good. Thank you.
And at that, and I mean anything. My father used to say that any work is better than no work. And so if you are a Christian young man or woman for whom Christ died and sacrificed that supreme blood, and you wake up any 24 hours of the day and you don't do anything productive, anything that creates value, anything that adds benefit to another person's life and to yourself, Christ must be frowning.
Wonderful.
When we come next year, we should really have the young panelists sitting here while we are listening to them.
Jendayi, last we met, I think it was in Tanzania, you were talking to me about the commodity exchange platform you wanted to build. You've come from public service into a place of broader leadership beyond the public service, the private sector leadership as well. And I remember the letter that you co-authored to President Trump asking that he set standards that the rest of the population in the United States will feel the presidency that he's going to have aligns with the value set that historically has been the case. So I see all these diverse set of actions, all of them pointing to excellence, standards. What are your frustrations about the current situation in Africa when people like yourself set a bar so high? What is the frustration that you feel when you try to set a bar so high?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And first, let me just say thank you to the church for the warm welcome and to its leadership for the invitation. Archbishop Duncan, Nicholas Duncan Williams, and Lady Rosa, thank you very much for the invitation. Before I talk about frustration, and of course there are some, I want to just chime in on one of the questions you asked about how do you recognize the change that's coming. And there's been tremendous wisdom shared this entire day. And I think that, you know, the issue of an assignment and an issue of talent is part of that recognition of change. And when you are in your sweet spot, where it's easy for you, I, for one, have a sweet spot in conflict resolution. I can end wars. I know that about myself. When you're in that sweet spot and you've been practicing for a long time and you have tremendous experience and you've developed expertise, you see it coming. You recognize the signs.
But what about the courage? You were the first American official to jet into Somalia. To jet into Somalia.
I did, because I know how to solve conflict and I'm not scared of it. Because it's a talent, it's an assignment, it's a vision that I was given at a very young age and that I can hone and get the expertise around it. So it's easy for me. Something else could be hard, like business is not such an assignment, I must say. It's a struggle. But the point is, even if you're a basketball player or you're an academic or whatever you are, when you're really deep into your field, you can see it. You can see around the corner. It's vision and it's experience. And I just want to say that sort of practically about that question. Honing that, you have that vocation, your experience, you have expertise, you recognize the signs, and you're a part of bringing about those signs as well. My frustration, I guess I would say what I found through business is impatience. I didn't realize I was an impatient person. When I was in my sweet spot, I was working and solving problems and very just practically oriented. When I went into business, I could see I had vision, I had strategy, but I couldn't necessarily have the influence to bring about the results that I wanted, whether it's influence by convincing or influence through resources, or just having the persistence and time to wait for the environment to unfold the way I then could make a move. And so I think impatience has been a big frustration, and that impatience has to do with how the world is progressing and where Africa should be in that world. And the need to move rapidly. We are talking about the young people of this continent, you know, and we're talking about the need for job creation. We're talking about the need to institutionalize the peace that has happened, you know, over the last 20 years. We are talking about the need to sustain and make inclusive the economic growth that has happened. We, you know, every society goes forward and moves backwards. It goes forward, and hopefully it's 3 or 4 steps forward, maybe a half step backwards. But Africa has to move fast forward. And so the perception, and I think actually Oby said it very well, the knowledge of the greatness of each and every one of us and of this continent, and the frustration about the little things, the little divides, my little country, when, the size of a corporation is often bigger than the size of some GDPs of some countries. And, the realization that Africa's unity is its strength, right? Everything that is needed is on this continent. Everybody's been trying to take it, including human beings, right? We've been snatched. All of the resources have been snatched. The continent has everything that will power the development of this world, not just this continent. I always say that if Europe was smart, it would build a bridge to Africa so the young people could come there and develop Europe. Truly. Truly. And so it's there's a certain impatience, but what I've also learned in trying to manage that impatience and addressing, the issues of energy is that the young people really, we need to, I'm now an older person, we need to move to the side and help them emerge, because that's where the energy is, that's where the innovation is, and it's natural. It's natural. It's natural. They don't know better, right? I was meeting with President Kufuor yesterday, and he was talking about actually Rosa, myself, and some others in the U.S. administration. And he's like, I remember you little girls, he called us, little girls. And I thought, he's right. We were little girls. We didn't know better than to think that we could wield America's power to the benefit of Africa without limit. We didn't know any better. Young people, that lack of a sense of can't do and the energy to do and the creativity to solve problems is the answer to the continent's problem.
But yeah, I think that setting the bar also helps, because I remember there was a time that you wrote, was it to the Obama administration, about its tone in the way that it describes Africa, that its tone itself is a problem. And I've heard you on numerous occasions also talk about this low bar problem for Africa, which is a kind of bigotry. Most of the people here themselves have mentors, they look up to models. Is there ever a challenge that you find for young people that, you're so passionate about young people? The problem becomes the bigotry of low expectations. Do you confront that every now and then?
Well, I do think there is a bigotry of low expectations, but I don't think that's the issue. I think it's not an issue that's outside, it's an issue that's inside. And it's a mentality. And we call it colonial mentality or slave mentality. If you've been conditioned to think less of self, then you do less. Which is the point I'm saying that Oby came to this morning when she was talking about, this afternoon when she was talking about, we're meant for great things, right? There's no limit. When you talk about Nelson Mandela as the role model for the world in terms of leadership. And so I really think that the issue is in our own minds. It's not what others are expecting of us. It's conditioning and liberating the mind and realizing that one can do anything. Anything that you conceive, you can achieve. And so I think the opening the mind and freeing one's mind is the first step. That's the standard.
Interesting. I want to lead from there. I mean, we've discussed mindsets, we've discussed self-transformation. I'm looking at, there's this famous saying that the best way to predict the future is to make it. And you've shown tremendous ability to sense the changing times. In Nigeria, you were a member of the PDP administration at some point, a minister in the PDP administration. Then you felt that standards were falling way too low. And you led a civil society movement against what some will call your own party for a long period of time. Many people believe that some of those agitations, in inverted commas, constituted part of the change, political change we see in Nigeria today. What do you think about all these streams of thought so far?
Number one is to say that I don't belong to any party.
Okay.
Not even when I was in government.
Okay.
I was a technocrat that was invited into government. But, to your larger question about predicting the future, what I want to leave this place with, Archbishop and Lady Rosa, is that when we come next year, we should really have the young panelists sitting here while we are listening to them. And that the conversation we're going to have when we come next year is going to be about truly disruptive leadership. The leadership that will say goodbye to an oil-based African economy, copper-based African economy, gold-based African economy. Goodbye. We had enough of the failures associated with you. Because think of it. If you saw the data on how much this continent has earned out of natural resources, and yet talks about almost 48% of population in poverty, then you know you need to disrupt leadership. Now, what kind of disruptive leadership should we be talking about next year? The leadership on this continent that would be co-leaders of the fourth industrial revolution. Africa missed the agricultural revolution. It missed the industrial revolution. It has participated in the ICT revolution and significantly benefited from it as a consumer. But I am looking for disruptive leadership amongst this new generation that will understand some of the things I was saying in my earlier conversation. That right here in this hall, if God were to open what some of them are carrying, oh God, it would be unbelievable. They would just see themselves as people who would lead in AI, artificial intelligence. They will lead in robotics. They will lead in blockchain technology. They would lead in simulation science. They would lead in big data. They would lead in Internet of Things. They would simply take Africa from the bottom to the top of the mountain. It is possible. It is in them. They can do it. We need to unbound them from this mental state of retardation and stagnancy and this feeling that there is somebody from the outside who is going to unlock them. You are activated. It is time to really get going. The knowledge to participate in this new economic state that the world is entering, that's the real disruptive leadership. I am saying to you, especially the young, I have no frustration. I have anger toward you. Because you are sitting and looking at the old ones and spending your time abusing them. They will soon be gone. Your abuse will mean nothing. What kind of a continent are you going to build in the next decade? In the next decade, you have an opportunity to completely disrupt leadership. Disrupt it right now. It is possible. Archbishop, don't you want them to disrupt leadership? Of course. We want you to disrupt leadership. Whether it's in the business sector, in civil society, in government, we should disrupt leadership. My final point is, when we gather like this, some ideas come out. Leadership development, there is no deliberate approach to it on the continent. None. It hardly exists. In a chaotic manner, people get into politics. In a chaotic manner, they can emerge into somebody or something. We shouldn't have that. Let this platform be a platform that can lead us toward deliberate grooming and development of the kind of leadership that will disrupt things in this country. If you start with Ghana, then the breeze will blow to Sierra Leone and to Togo and then Nigeria, and it will go around the continent. But let's not accept the status quo. Disruptive leadership is leadership that looks at the status quo and say, not good enough, and we kick you off. Wonderful.
We have a very few minutes left, so I'm going to be taking rounding comments. If we can keep it very brief, because we're already past 6 p.m. Doc, I just want to check with you. Some of the insights that I derived from Oby's arguments is that we have to be careful also about the labels. So some are in private sector, civil society, etc. I think we're also getting to a stage where we are going to see lots more people that combine these different domains of operation. And I think in those of you that are faith-driven, this is obvious, because you are called into a kingdom where everything is allowed. What do you think about that as your closing remarks?
I agree with many of the comments made, especially with regards to the importance of converting this platform into an annual event that helps groom leaders and also giving special space to young people to see what they can do better than their fathers and their mothers. I mean, for the first time in human history, a 16-year-old person can have almost as much knowledge, not experience, but knowledge, as his 60-year-old father or grandfather, just simply because of the internet and the World Wide Web. So you can download on your palm what your father or mother took many years to acquire knowledge. But I'm sorry to say that much as we look forward to the young disrupting the system and doing things better, the signs are not very encouraging from certain quarters. Whether it is through their socialization, whether it's through upbringing, whether it's through household challenges, many young people are growing up with a spirit of entitlement, which doesn't allow them to explore all the talents that God has given us, whether 1, 2, or 5. I'll give you an example of young people that I myself tried to mentor, some of whom I tried to open businesses with because they came to me and said, I want to start this business, I don't have money. I offer the person 10,000 cedis, let's open an account right here on this premises. And then after a few months, the gentleman wants to literally run off with the money and tells the bank to take off my name as a signatory so he can access the money alone. Now, when you get that kind of experience, it doesn't help you to be very encouraging to the next person who comes along who also needs your help. So we need the spirit of morality and the Christian principles that we are talking about to be very deeply infused in that generation, because they have the wisdom, they have the knowledge, they have the capacity, but the morality is not always there, not always. Some are very good, and I agree that we must nurture them in such a way as to bring them up and let them get into all the disciplines and fields that Dr. Oby is talking about. But this is why mentorship is important. I think she herself spoke about capacity, so did Archbishop, that people need to be groomed, people need to take time, they need to have, it takes time to get to a certain point, so you can't really shortcut some of the training and exposure that you need to take the right decisions. We have this experience in this country where a young person was offered a deputy ministerial position, and within a short time we heard the person trying to openly say she wants to make $1 million, but that's what young ministers should be making. If you come into government and into leadership with that kind of mindset, then the disruptiveness that we are talking about, you may disrupt it for a negative purpose rather than disrupting for a positive purpose. So yes, we want disruption, but we want positive oriented disruption, not negative change, as it were.
So we have a hard stop. We had a hard stop because we have to prepare for Bishop T.D. Jakes' closing evening service. I have enjoyed myself tremendously. I hope you have too. I want to use this opportunity again to thank the Archbishop and Lady Rosary Taker for inviting all of us here to share our views and opinions. And I want to thank my panel for this pleasure, or for this honor, and for the joy that they've given all of us. Thank you all very much. Can we have a round of applause?